What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and in this video, we're going to be explaining what happened to Geraldine at the end of episode 3 of WandaVision, as well as addressing the mystery of Ralph, because this is actually a really interesting concept, and I think I know what's going on with Ralph. So if you guys saw the video that we did last week, we basically pitched our idea for what we thought was going on in WandaVision, and based on what we've seen in this episode, we were right. Anybody who was walking around with this theory was basically right. Not my theory per se, but the theory in general, right, was correct. I'm not going to be so arrogant as to hog all the credit for myself, even though I'd love to. But anybody who had that theory was basically correct in this, in the sense that Wanda's controlling everything. I was incorrect about the fact that Vision was in on it. Obviously, Vision is not. But at the end of the episode, we saw that Geraldine had seemed to have kind of come to her senses, or at the very least, addressed the fact that Pietro died at the hands of Ultron, and because she seemingly wouldn't reveal where she was from or her identity or anything like that, she was thrown out by Wanda. Now, we didn't really get the gritty details of that, as most of you guys know. It basically took place off screen, but we know that she's working for S.W.O.R.D. We knew that by virtue of some of the little emblems and her necklace and things like that we'd seen previously, and the end of the episode. So that begs the question, when she was thrown out, where is she at? Well, this is where things get a little interesting. The running theory is that Doctor Strange is currently out there, and Doctor Strange is dealing with all this stuff. My theory is not yet. And the reason why is that if S.W.O.R.D. is an entity unto itself, which is to say the sentient weapon observation and response division or department, whatever you want to call it, if they're an entity unto themselves and they're investigating this, then it would almost seem like the Marvel Cinematic Universe cutting them off at the knees to have Doctor Strange show up immediately. We'd want to know what S.W.O.R.D. was capable of, right? What can S.W.O.R.D. actually do? And so what I think is going on here right now is that Geraldine, along with a handful of other people who are basically in this location, are working as agents of S.W.O.R.D. Not all of them, right? We know that like the Doctor, for example, I think is a citizen inside, or one of the people inside this small town that was taken over by Wanda. We know that like Dottie, for example, is a person who lives in this town, different things like that. But Geraldine is one of these instances where she was a S.W.O.R.D. agent who was sent in to infiltrate. I think she came in through the helicopter that Wanda found in episodes 1 and 2 that was shrunken down. But regardless of how she got in there, she was there to basically keep an eye on things, right? To monitor things, to see what was going on, and to basically operate as something akin to a spy. Wanda found out, the jig was up, and she was kicked out, right? That's basically how all that worked. And so the result of this is that at the moment, I think it's just S.W.O.R.D., right? I think that's all it is. It's just S.W.O.R.D., the agency, monitoring and trying to find a way in this impenetrable barrier. And then once it gets to the point where they cannot do it, then that will lead to the introduction of Doctor Strange. If I'm being honest, I imagine Benedict Cumberbatch is going to ask for a lot of money to appear in WandaVision. So it may be one of these things like when we saw Samuel Jackson appear in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., he shows up in one episode and it's only for like 5 or 10 minutes, if that, because it's all they can really afford. But we also know that with WandaVision, it's being ran by Disney Plus, right? It's not like it was with Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Netflix, the shows and all that kind of stuff, where they're running on a limited budget. It's the mouse, right? The mouse is paying for it all, right? The mouse has got the bill. And when the mouse has the bill, you can kind of get carried away with what you get. So it's entirely possible we could see Benedict Cumberbatch show up in the next episode and then basically say, I'm here to try to help you guys, only for us to learn that Wanda's powers actually exceed his own. And there's no way for Benedict Cumberbatch, for Doctor Strange, to overcome what Wanda's done. And I think this is a genius idea, because if that proves to be the case, then what it does is it goes towards the narrative that Wanda's gonna have to fix it on her own, right? Wanda has to do it by herself, because it would really seem to take away from the entire purpose of WandaVision if, like, at the end of the series, Doctor Strange swoops in and saves the day, right? At that point, it's WandaVision plus Doctor Strange. It didn't work. That dog don't bark. And so I think this is really gonna come down to Stephen Strange being able to offer a little bit of help, maybe talk to Wanda telepathically or something like that, or offer some suggestions to Agatha on what she should do. But the meat and potatoes of this is going to come down to Wanda fixing it all by herself. Now that begs the question, how did we get to this point? How did we get to this point where Wanda has clearly taken over this town and basically conscripted all these different citizens living in this town into being part of this sitcom type lifestyle that she loves so much, right? That she kind of idolized when she was growing up watching TV. Well, I think this comes down to Agatha Harkness. And I think Agnes, or Agatha, whatever you want to call her, is the root of all this, right? And I think it goes into the nature of her husband, Ralph. And this is what we're going to talk about here. One of the big prevailing theories about the character of Ralph is that Ralph is like Mephisto or Chthon or something like that. One of the other theories is that like Ralph was killed and Agatha is just kind of pretending he's still alive because she's not supposed to know he's dead. And so she just kind of continues on. That theory sort of falls flat on its face, because if it was true, why would she refer to her husband in the present tense? Why wouldn't she show even the slightest bit of mourning over the fact that her husband's dead? Why wouldn't she just simply be like, I don't know where Ralph is. Ralph's gone somewhere. And why would she pretend he's still there? Unless like Wanda killed Ralph in front of her and then it's just like, do not do this anymore, right? Do not mess around. But if that was the case, why would Agnes act like she's just meeting Wanda for the first time in episodes 1 and 2, right? So there's a lot of holes that go on in that particular theory. I'm of the opinion that Ralph is actually Mephisto. And here's the reason why. Don't worry, this will all wrap around into what's going on with with Wanda. But I think here's the reason why Ralph is Mephisto. So one of the things that Agnes says in the first and second episodes is that the only way her husband Ralph would remember the anniversary of their marriage is if there was a beer named after June 2nd, right? So their anniversary is on June 2nd. June 2nd, 1692, which is something that somebody pointed out on Twitter, is when the Salem witch trials happened. And so Agatha Harkness in Marvel Comics is a legitimate witch, right? The cauldron and the, sacrifice or killing like birds and, all that crazy stuff. For like the movie Hocus Pocus. She's similar to that, except not as goofy. But she is, in that way, a person who would likely be tracked down and killed during the Salem witch trials, assuming that Marvel decided to try to invoke some version of the Marvel Comics origin of her character into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now, this is where things shift. That if she was blamed as being a witch or accused of being a witch, most likely her husband would have been accused as well. She probably lost her family in the process, and that in that moment, sold her soul to the devil, right? Made a deal with Mephisto. We talked about that in the previous video, that Mephisto is one of those hell lords that shows up to you in a time when you're at your most desperate. And so if they're getting ready to put the fire to the thing, they're getting ready to burn her alive, right? And she's sitting there, she was like, I would do anything to survive this, or something like that. Then again, everything would stop. Mephisto would appear, say, what would you be willing to do in order for this to end in the way that you want it to? She'd offer some kind of an answer. Mephisto would basically give her the power she needs to overcome that, so then she would actually become a witch, or something like that, and then end up more or less saving the day. Lose her kids or lose her husband in the process, whatever the case is, none of that stuff really matters. The important thing behind this is that if that were true, then a deal would have to have been struck with Mephisto. Now, the problem with this theory and the problem with this philosophy is, how do we connect these dots, right? How do we bring these two things together? The reality is we don't really have enough information to do that, right? We don't really have enough information to link the possibility of Ralph being Mephisto to Agnes as the current witch now in the current state of affairs. But where I think a lot of this starts, and the reason why I think a lot of this really comes down to Agnes herself, is that if we remove Ralph from the equation, we simply ignore him and we just pretend that he's just some guy who doesn't really exist and Agnes is just playing the part. Then we look at her directly. Agatha Harkness in Marvel Comics was the friend and tutor of Wanda. Then in early Marvel Comics, Wanda didn't really have any control over her powers, or if she did, they were nowhere near as grand as they would be later on in Marvel Comics. Instead, she had her hex probability, so she could basically bend luck in her favor. That's really the limit of her powers. Now, once she started receiving instruction at the hands of Agatha, that's when her powers began to grow. And I think that's what happened here, right? Somewhere along the line, she was either instructed to go visit Agatha by way of like Stephen Strange or somebody else, or maybe stumbled into Agatha of her own accord and volition, looking up people who are like her. We don't really know what she was doing, but by whatever manner and whatever means, Agatha took her under her wing. And under the training of Agatha, Wanda's powers began to grow. And there may have very well been some kind of conversation between the two where Agatha's like, tell me a little more about your life. And, Wanda starts talking about losing Pietro. She starts talking about losing her parents. She starts talking about losing these different things. And that's when she suffers a psychotic break. Not in the sense that she just goes bonkers right off the bat, but the wheels in her brain start turning. And then she starts finding herself asking questions. What if I could make things the way that I wanted them to be? Maybe Agatha makes some offhanded remark. It's like, well, wouldn't it be nice if we could just make the world the way we wanted it to be? And then suddenly that turns into, well, what if I could though? And using the powers that she now has, she starts to craft this dream life in this small town. And there's nothing Agatha can do to stop her because she's simply just not powerful enough. And so Agatha is in effect responsible for all of this. It would make sense for a variety of reasons. It would make sense because we know from the trailers that Agatha reveals to Vision that he's dead. We know that Agatha is Agatha Harkness. She's a witch. We know that while she does have magical powers and abilities, it would explain why she doesn't have the ability to overcome the power of Wanda, because she's just not on that same level. There's a lot of different reasons why I think this theory works. But at the end of the day, kind of circling back around to Geraldine, I think Geraldine has just been expelled from the inside of the dome, right? The inside of this little town that Wanda's taken over. She's going to report all her findings to Sword. Sword's going to realize there's only so much they can do. They're going to bring in Doctor Strange, and that's going to lead to Benedict Cumberbatch character being part of WandaVision, even if only temporarily. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure you guys check the videos that you have on the screen right now. You'll find one that'll explain Elizabeth Olsen's character, and you'll find another video here that will actually get you caught up on the discussion that we had from last week. So anyway, guys, we're going to go ahead and bring this to an end. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.